Further ado, let's begin this debate. So let me tell you a little story about these nice places we call banks. So here's what's going on here. On average, banks are giving us about a 1.5 interest rate back to us. But here's the thing: every year, the United States increases their prices and inflation by 2%. So they're actually taking away money from us, if you really think about it. Which brings us to our topic at hand here. This house believes that banks do more harm than good. Observation 1, resolutional analysis. We reserve the right to define. So we're going to define this as a policy debate. And subpoint B, the terms. This house is going to be the U.S. federal government. And banks will be all federal insured banks. And do more harm than good is the interest rates hurt financial stability and decrease quality of life. And the plan text is that we want to regulate interest rates on savings accounts to keep up with the rate of inflation, no lower than 4%. And subpoint B, it's going to be net benefits. Does anyone have any questions? All right, moving on. Advantage 1, financial stability. The harms is that interest rates are much too low. They are at a 1.5% on average. And like I said in my thesis, that only the inflation is increasing by 2% every year. So the banks are essentially just taking away money from the people who trust them, from the people who trust their well-being to these people, and they're just simply just taking away money from them. Yes.
Do all banks have the 2%? Or I'm sorry, the 1.5%?
Majority of them do.
Rate?
Majority of them do.
How many is that?
It's average.
Average. I just said average.
Okay.
So the harms is that interest rates are far too low, and that since you're not making enough money to be able to take care of your problems, you won't be able to you won't be able to make payments such as for cars, for homes, for home payments. And the inherency is it's structural. It's a decreased interest rate, and the interest rate is decreasing, and it's constantly unregulated. Nobody is keeping the banks in line. Nobody is checking to make sure that I forgot to time myself. So can you someone time me?
Yeah, go ahead. Just go through your speech.
Okay. Okay. So they're constantly unregulated. There's no one's paying attention to exactly what they're doing. So they're pretty much getting away with millions of dollars. And the solvency is that it's going to be regulated by the U.S. federal government. What's your question, sir?
Does the FDIC regulate banks?
Not as much as they need to.
Okay.
And the interest rate, the U.S. federal government will do a much better job in regulating banks. They're a much stronger force. They will be able to regulate much more to the banks so that they can do more good than harm, because they're just getting away with too much money, and this needs to stop. And the impact to this is that the youth will be able to save more money this time. With our plan text of people saving 4% interest every year, if you start saving money at a younger age, and you will be able to make enough money so that you can retire, and you'll be able to work you're going to be able to have more workable income at your disposal. The second impact is that it's going to improve the quality of life in the middle class. There are too many people in middle class who are struggling financially. The only people that you hear often who are doing well with themselves are people in the 10% category, the more well-off, wealthy people. Well, that's just because they know exactly what they're doing, and they don't really go to banks to save money. And unfortunately, the middle class don't have that kind of education, that kind of education, and that kind of knowledge that healthier upper class people do. So they rely on banks in hopes that can be some way that they can save money. The third impact is that, or like I said, it's going to improve the middle class's quality of life. The third impact is that it's going to improve quality of life when you retire, when you become a senior citizen. So at age 62, which is the retirement age for a lot of senior citizens, in terms of jobs, they'll be able to have enough money to save up for their interest rates, so that they can have enough money so they can live comfortably, so that they can have a great quality of life. And and they enjoy the golden years of their lives. And with that, I'm going to go to my second advantage, which would be accountability. And out of all the banks, only one, Wall Street Finance, went to jail. So as I mentioned before, they're not being regulated. These banks are getting away with a lot of money, and and very, very, very few people are being held accountable for these problems. They can do whatever they want. They could actually they could decrease the interest rate less than 1.5%, and they could still get away with it. And yes, you did mention that like the FDIC can do something about it, but nothing has been done at all. They're still getting away with a lot of money. And no one can really do much about it. And that's the harms there. And the solvency is that the U.S. federal government will hold these people more accountable to their actions, and the impact is that they're going to be held more accountable, and they're not going to rip off people that are relying on them for their financial stability. And what is your question, sir?
Yeah, I don't understand how in your plan anybody's being held accountable for anything. Like, you're just, correct me if I'm wrong, but your plan says that USFG will regulate interest rates so they can be no lower than 4%.
No, yeah, that's correct.
How are you? What?
Oh, you mean you want a base number to go by? 4% more than the current inflation rate of the United States. Is that clear?
No.
No?
But whatever.
Okay. All right. Anyways, that's and for those reasons, you should vote for the government. Thank you.
Okay, for a quick off-time roadmap, I'm going to go off-case with 2 off-case arguments, and then on-case. Get my timer set up. Okay, is everybody ready? Okay, thanks everyone for being here, and let's get right into this. I first want to start with a trichotomy argument, sorry. They say that this is a policy debate, and that they have the right to define, but they never really said what particular words made them put this as a policy. Our, counter-interpretation of this is this should be a value debate, because the wording of this describes a value. This House believes we should be talking about whether or not they believe, like, whether or not something does more harm than good, not a plan based on banks. So the violation here is, instead of just talking about weighing the pros and cons of banks or of how banks regulate themselves, we're talking about a plan now that's put into action. The standards here is going to be ground, because they're taking our prep time, our grounds to say how banks could be improved or a type of bank. They're not letting us get through any of this. So my voters here are going to be a priori, because this is the first thing you need to look at. Because this is like a procedural, you have to look at this before we can even get into the debate. And then a second voter is going to be, again, ground, because we're not really having a fairly prepped topic. They're stealing all our prep time, and it's just not fair for the sake of debate. Okay, so now on to my counter plan. My counter plan is going to be that the USFG regulates in the same way interest rates, but they say to match inflation prices for the year. So they have to be equal to inflation prices or more. So they can be equal to or above They don't have to be up to 4%. Say inflation is 1% or 2%, it can match that. So let's now get on to, and we think the net benefit for this counterplan is we're not giving away free money to people. The bank still will have enough money to lend out. All they're doing is making sure people aren't losing money. Yes, Joe.
Can you repeat your counterplan text?
Okay, so it's going to be pretty much your same text, except the banks regulate interest rates so they can be no lower than the current inflation, like America's current inflation, because we're talking about USFG. Now, does that answer your question? Now getting on to on case. Their first is interest rates are too low. That there's 2% inflation, and it's like it's stealing money from these people. My first response is yes, but now you're only making them too high. You're taking away banks' abilities to lend money. You're taking away their ability. They have less money to give out. That means less loans given out. That means like less small businesses can start up, less investment, a more stagnant economy, because one of the main drivers of our economy is banks investing. So because we don't want people just hoarding their money in like a safe, that's why we have banks, so they can invest. But now you're giving away too much, less of that. The economy is going to take another hit if this happens. Then they said that home payments are unregulated and there's no regulation, and that their plan would fix this because the government will regulate, even though we know that the government does not regulate. The whole process, I have here that lobbyists come and they write laws for our government. So there's no like solvency here, because there's still going to be no regulation as long as the federal government is doing it. They'll find ways to get around it. And especially with this plan, because it's so high, because you have to give 4% interest to everybody who puts in any money, banks are going to find a way around this. They're going to lobby around it as much as possible. So you'll just see no change, because our government has a history of not being able to regulate these things. And because we saw with the bank crash just recently that only one bank out of the top 25 banks giving like these subprime mortgages was actually following the rules or held accountable. So as you can see, they have no solvency here because it's not going to be regulated. The banks are going to find loopholes and ways to get out of it. Then on their D point, they say people will save more money and people will get money. But that also correlates to what I said earlier. There's less money. Banks are lending less now. They won't be able to finance like small business, and will create a stagnant economy, which means more people will be fired, more people will be unemployed. And the best, because banks may be taking a little bit too much and the value of your money might be depreciating, it's not as bad as losing your job because of a terrible economy or not being able to find work. So the harms there are more. You can turn this right around. They say improve quality of life, but because, again, the economy is going to stagnate, because all these things, you're going to have a decreased quality of life because less jobs. We finally got the unemployment number down, and now they're going to bring it back up by having less investment in companies, less loans to like people create jobs and new jobs. So you're going to see all the effects of this is going to go to decreased quality of life. And then for retirement, again, this doesn't solve retirement because it's going to have a more stagnant economy, which their money's going to be worth less anyway. By making a recession is not good for people's retirements either. Now let's get on to their second point of accountability. They said no jail, nobody's held accountable. First of all, I would like to cross-apply all these arguments to their last point because it's inconsistent what you see here. You see, the government fails to hold people accountable, and then they're trusting the government to hold like a new thing accountable. Both these points don't really make sense. And then even so, if that did make sense, their plan has no way of like no special enforcement that's going to hold people accountable. It's just going to say the federal government randomly does it, and they didn't list an enforcement mechanism that's going to send more people to jail. It's not going to send more Wall Street bankers to prison. So how is this going to hold more accountable? I didn't really get a B point here, but their C point, their plan holds more accountability, you can just ignore all that. It doesn't. You can, in fact, turn this accountability to their interest rates. Because the government doesn't hold people accountable, because you're making banks do such a high, like a risky thing that they won't want to do, you're going to make them find loopholes or ways out of it, which just caused the banking crash we're just starting to claw our way out of. So you can see, like, the second point doesn't even have any impacts on it that I got. Maybe that it's more people will go to jail, or that these banks will be hold to a higher standard, but there's no enforcement of it. So you can either, so just use it as a turn for their whole case, because they're making a thing where banks are gonna want to get out of it. They won't have the same amount of money to lend out. They're going to stagnate the economy. There's so many reasons why banks are gonna try and find this way out. They have lobbyists writing laws for them. There's no way this plan like even works at all. So that's why I urge you vote a negative ballot. Thank you. I don't have any that you can well, not my Xbox pass. Can I see my phone? Yeah.
Start thinking rebuttal, even right now. Okay? Like, just whatever points that this debate is focused on, like, just start focusing on those and write something out so you have something prepared for when you get up there.
All right. Quick roadmap, same order as before me. So let's get into this TRICAW. Their A point, or rather, we define this as a policy debate, and they say we didn't say why. But Stephan and I think that it's pretty clear that if this House believes banks do more harm than good, that this House is going to take action, right? It's not like when you think something is a problem in your life, you just say, oh, well, we've decided it's a problem, but we're not going to take any action. No, so in the real world, how it works is when something is a problem, you take action. When something is harmful, you provide a solution. So my second response is also, we are the government team and we reserve the right to define, and just because our definition might catch you off guard doesn't mean that it's wrong or abusive in any way. Their counter definition was that this is a value debate because it's about wording and belief. So my first response is that one, it doesn't change the debate at all, and we meet that because we're talking about, if the federal government believes banks do more harm than good, they're going to take an action. So we're talking about what they believe. But secondly, they don't give us like what kind of value debate this is, or like some sort of alternative criterion with which to look at this. So it's like, even if you want to go with their counter definition, which is very vague in itself, there's no way then to weigh the debate. The violation, they say that we can't. They were supposed to be talking about pros and cons of banks. Instead, we have a plan. My first response is we are talking about pros and cons of banks, and this centers on banks. Certainly, we're talking about a plan. Getting to standards, they talk about ground, but there's no ground abuse when they try to run a counter plan and they have case arguments and And they said it's supposed to be about how banks could be improved. And that is exactly what this debate is about, how banks can be improved. And that's what our plan does. So when there are impacts of a priori, you can look at the case because I've proven this TRICAW, you're not going to vote on it. And about ground, there's no ground abuse. And if there is, please articulate that in the later speeches. Now let's move to the counterplan. Their counterplan text, to me, was almost like the exact same thing as our text. So theirs was the U.S. federal government will regulate the interest rates to be no lower than inflation. That's exactly what our plan is. So perm that. There's no competition. Yeah.
What if interest rates are below like 4%? What if inflation rates are below 4%?
What if inflation rates are below 4%?
Yeah, because your original plan is 4%. Banks have to give something up to 4%.
Yeah.
What if inflation rate is 2.1%?
Then they still have to go 4%
Okay.
with our plan.
Okay.
So, in any case, we don't think that just matching inflation rate is going to solve to the extent that we need to either. But it's not competitive. Net benefits, they just say, well, they're not giving away free money. First of all, no one is giving away free money. This is about like saving and interest rates. So because no one's giving away free money, or maybe they are, I don't know. But if there's no net benefit to prefer their counterplan, you're not going to want to prefer it. So now let's get to case. Also, before I get to case, to close out my off-case responses, I'd like to say there were no disadvantages, so consider that. Now, advantage one about financial stability. Their first response is they say, yeah, these harms are happening, but now your plan is going to be too high and give away too much money. My response is that, okay, they've acknowledged that there are harms, and so my response when they say that this is too much is, first of all, this is not too much. In fact, to keep with the rate of inflation plus 1 or 2%, which is basically what our plan is not too high, and that's typically like what's done in other financial sectors. So there's no way this is giving away too much, and there was no warrant as to why this uniquely is too much. Their second response was, this is going to make less loans available. There will be less investments. My first response is, I don't know if we all remember the stimulus package that was passed like a few years ago that literally gave the biggest banks billions of dollars in bailout money from the taxpayers, you and I. So I don't think banks are going to be like really upset about this and not have as much of their money available. That stimulus package was put in place so that there would be finances available. So it's not going to affect the amount of loans available or investments available. This isn't going to be some like super massive thing that's going to shut down our economy like they would have you believe. I'll get to you after my third response. Response. So their third point was that like even so, banks are just going to lobby around it like they have done. My first response is that this isn't going to happen. You can look at Standard and Poor's, a rating company that like rated subprime mortgages. They are settling with the government now, like it's on NPR for I think it's like $80 billion. So they weren't able to lobby around it. But my second response is that even if they do lobby around it, we still get the intermittent solvency of people being able to retire and having financial stability until it gets overturned. So those are my responses there. Yeah, what's up? We'll take one question.
Can you give me an example of an industry that you described having a 4% interest rate? You said there are examples.
Yeah, like so for example, like minimum wage, another thing when they're like, yeah, we should have it be not just with the inflation rate, but it should be like even more. That's why they're not talking about like just raising it minimum wage by 2%, but to like 15 and things like that. The industry of finances. Sorry, I don't have. Or actually, I can take your question. Let's do it. Be quick, please. Thanks.
I was just saying. So, are you gonna have us give a stimulus package every year to the banks, or like?
No. Okay, so their next thing they said to our argument was that this is going to create a stagnant economy, which is going to cause jobs to be lost. So my first response is that there are no empirics. They just sound like kind of like a really Republican, really partisan like congressperson saying like whatever you decide to do that you think is going to help people is going to cause a stagnant economy to lose jobs. There are no empirics that says this is going to happen, and no reasoning rather. And when we say that the banks have enough money from the stimulus package, there are finances available, that the economy won't become stagnant. In fact, turn this economy increases because now when people have more savings and more disposable funds to be able to spend, that's what increases the economy. When people have money to spend, which is literally what Stephan and I are doing with our plan, is giving people more money to have to save. So now let's get to our impacts. First, about our first one, about youth and how it's important, like how to start saving at a younger age, Stephan says, to ultimately get to our third impact of retirement. But about the middle class, how it's really important that they have money saved for house, apartment, rent, things like that. The middle class is experiencing stagnant wages. We have to find another way to help them. We think that increasing these interest rates is a way to do it. We also think this gives people the financial stability in order to retire. As costs of healthcare rise as you get older, we think it's important that the money you have saved cares for you. So then they point out our hypocrisy on our second advantage of our gov not holding people accountable, and now we're using the gov. My first response is look to our Standard and Poor's example, where the gov does hold them accountable, and then also that we're literally making the gov regulate.
Yeah. Okay. Well, make sure. Once again, thank you. So with regards to this, I'm first going to go, I'll go on case and off case. So on case, I'd like to talk about some responses given in Advantage 1. Yeah, you said a lot. Okay, so when you criticize us for saying that we have no empirical data points to talk about, that also goes in line with the fact that we thought this was a value debate based on the wording of the resolution. So saying that we have no empirical data is an unfair thing to bring up, given the nature of this debate. And then you also say that they can with that money that they'll be getting from the 4% interest rate through saving all that money, that consumers can spend that money and stimulate the economy. I would ask on what? There's going to be little to no new business, and as a result, little to no new job creation, because loans will freeze when banks are losing their shorts because they have to give away a whole extra 2% of what normally they wouldn't even be considering in a loan calculation. What this 2%, which you take to be some trivial value, means is that immediately, overnight, the economy becomes 2% more inefficient. It freezes the way you're drastically increasing the amount of money that is required by a bank to be given out. And as a result, the bank will have much less to spend out. They already have this thing called fractional reserve banking, where the bank is dividing money up by fractions of 10 and giving that money out. Basically what that is, it's diluting the money supply. And what you're doing here is you're saying, let's give out more diluted money to the economy and totally shortchange people's value of the dollar. And so what this will do is will totally freeze the economy in a way that would not be good for any of your advantages that you claim to have by this. They don't come as a result of totally deflating the money supply. With regards to the S&P whole being accountable to the government, I'd like to just point out again that one bank was following the rules during the last financial crisis. That was one major bank was following the rules. And so it shows that there is no accountability actually happening in this sector. Yes, I'll take the question.
So you're saying, back to your earlier statement, is that if we increase by 4%, it's going to drastically impact the bank in some way?
I'm saying you're going to deflate the money supply greater because you're freezing loans because now loans cost more for banks to do, so they're going to be less apt to do it. And two, you're going to be diluting the money supply because banks have to divide money in order to stay in business. And by giving out more of this divided money, you're just deflating the money supply faster, and so you'll decrease the economy. So those are two reasons why the economy will take a turn for the worse if this plan was enacted. With regards to Advantage 2 accountability, I just touched on that, how... yeah, so inconsistent. Loopholes will be found. They lobby, like my partner said. There's no impacts on accountability as well. If banks are more accountable, what happens? We don't even know what the plan does with regards to that. And so basically your Advantage 2 is just sitting there. There's nothing good or bad happening with it. However, we can show that it's inconsistent. With regards to the off case, I'd like to talk about our tricot. So you talked about how this house believes implies action and how the real world, that's what we're talking about, the real world. However, we're talking about a debate. And one of the points of a debate is to educate ourselves about the topics that we're discussing. And education can't happen when we take resolutions and we totally turn them on their head and don't follow what the standard interpretation of a resolution would be. This house believes does not imply actions. It simply implies that there is a house that we can weigh values of against. And so it was not a fair setup for this debate because even though you did say gov defines, you can't simply go out of the bounds of what was expected. With regards,
We don't have empirics.
yeah, we have no way of prepping for a policy debate when it says banks do more harm than good, being, and any other debate that would be a value debate. With regards to our counter definition, the counter definition of value, you said it doesn't change. The will take action. So basically, not crazy action is what I would respond to that. With regards to the pro and con thing, where are we discussing the pros and cons of banks here? We're simply addressing the pros and cons of your plan with regards to banks, and so we're not actually meeting what you claim to be meeting. The second thing is that no, that's all I need to say for that. Basically, the tricot still stands because you have failed to give a reason why we should take your interpretation over what would be the most educational, what would be expected in a debate for what we're talking about, especially when it says do more harm than good. Our counterplan. Our counterplan is drastically more safe than your plan would be at the 4% rate, because by matching inflation, it's essentially cutting the banks even with what they're going to be making. The banks are making that 2% inflation on the money they have, but they're also giving that away to the people. So in that way, it's a much less harmful thing than if they'd had an additional 2% burden on them to give away. You said that you're not giving away free money. Well, you are actually giving away free money. I'll take your question.
Yeah, can you explain to me the uniqueness of this 2% difference and how, like, you're saying your counterplan, none of the bad stuff happens.
No,
But 2%
saying it break even.
difference
Yeah, essentially.
is going to, it's a brink scenario. So can you explain to me the uniqueness of that brink scenario?
Oh, I did not say brink scenario. You
It's
said
also
brink
for
scenario.
the
I simply
harms
said there will
that
be
you do- that
great
you have.
damages by forcing banks to give up 2% of what they want. What did you say?
It solves for the harms that he originally set up because
Okay, it does.
people are putting in.
It does solve
and
for the
giving us-
harms that you originally set up, because in your plan you did not account for that this would be damaging to the banks, and you assume that it's actually going to increase the economy. When I had showed through 2 points that it will in fact decrease the economy by diluting the money supply and then forcing banks to do less loans because they won't make as much money as they would. They're disincentivized for making loans, and that's the whole point. If we are going to talk about the policy, is there anything else I need to talk about? No? Okay. I'll just go back to what's going on with the Advantage 1.
Make sure you talk about how you unturn it and you do make it does make the economy worse.
Yeah, it does make the economy worse. I guess I'm
he's
turning
like
that turn.
Yeah.
So I'm unturning it. I pointed out through 2 points of interest. If I had gone with, if this had from the get-go been a policy debate, I would have had data to support that. But essentially, fractional reserve banking forces banks to dilute money, and you're diluting money faster by having a 4% rate out. You're throwing the diluted money out there quicker. And with all that, vote affirmative because the opposing team doesn't understand the basics of banking. Thank you.
Aren't you guys the opposition?
Oh wait,
Yeah.
Scratch that.
Are they already opposing?
I'm so used to being PM. Like, funny.
I have 4 minutes, correct? I'm gonna just do voters, and I might get to a 2 worlds, I might not. Okay, so final time. Thanks everybody for being here. Let's just get into debating. My first voter is going to be on the trichotomy, and because this is where the main issue says, we said that everything points to it being a value debate. There's only 3 types of debate, and all the signs point to value, and yet they made it a policy, and their only solution was in the real. Their only response was in the real world. You know, when you have a problem, you fix it. Well, in debate, you talk about things. So and there's only 3 ways to do it, and they picked the wrong one, which let us, all our preparation time was taken away. All our ground, they have the nerve to say that we don't have empirics when they're making this a policy debate that we could have no idea to prep for. So, but we do understand baking, so that's how we were able to come up with a counter plan and everything else. So you should vote on ground here and a priori. This is an a priori issue. You have to look at it first before you can weigh any of the other things. And we think we're winning on this because they took our ground of being able to solve a problem or like just a little tune that they need to make. The second voter is going to be our counter plan. Because their original harms set up that people are putting in more money than they're getting out. We solve for that. People are putting in the same amount of money that they're getting back because they're only getting, at minimum, they're getting the inflation rate. If a bank wants to be generous and give out more money for free for literally not doing anything, then they can do that, but we're not forcing them to put 4%, like to really take a chunk away from their investment totals. Like my partner said, 4% or however much it could be away from the economy. Sometimes money deflates too, so there's all of these issues with this. Our perm has more net benefits because it solves for the harm. People get what they put in, but it does not have any of the like stagnating of the economy disadvantages that we're talking about. We're just making a fair system that banks should run by. My next voter is going to be their stagnation of the economy. Their plan is going to keep banks from investing. It's going to hurt the middle class. Everything they set out to do, they're going to hurt because the middle class will, like the economy will be stagnant. It will be frozen out. There will be no job creation because banks have less money to lend. They said that a stimulus takes care of that the taxpayers paid for a stimulus once, and that solved everything. I guess we're going to stimulate the banks all the time now, or how's that going to work? Anyway, it's going to, like my partner pointed out, it's freezing the economy. There's all this disadvantage to it. There's no way that this plan has, like, you're not going to help anybody by hurting the economy. All we want to do is create a fair system. My final voter is going to be accountability and hypocrisy. So first of all, they give us this this advantage with no impacts attached to it, but it's talking about how there is no accountability in banking. And then they give us a plan that also has no accountability. So there's really no purpose here. We know banks don't follow the rules. We know they don't like to follow the rules. So Judge, if you want to live in a world where people just get what they put in and everything's fair and that's how we do, or you want to have a stagnant economy where banks are forced to give out more money than they have, where the money deflates, or where you're going to give away less valuable money or make inflation worse by freezing the economy, you can do that. Thank you. Water?
Yeah. Yeah, you can either bring some of this or
I'll get it up.
so are you good with all of that?
Yeah.
Got it. Alright.
Spreading it to 5 minutes, I'm not sure, but I'll give it a shot.
Just do it as long as it needs to be.
Okay.
That's all it needs to be.
Okay, so let's just get started now. Anyways, what a great debate. Let me just go on with my voters. Voter number 1 is that our plan supports financial stability. It's going to help out the youth with saving money with the 4% interest rate, and it's going to improve their way of living when in the middle class, because as we all know, the middle class is constantly struggling, and with this, they wouldn't be struggling as much. They would actually be able to do things. They would actually have a more an improved quality of life, and ultimately would lead to more money for them when they retire as senior citizens. And that's all we want. I'm pretty sure that's what everyone wants here. It's to retire at a pretty good age and live comfortably for the rest of your days. And voter number 2 is that the consumer is much more important than the banks. And and if the consumer is constantly struggling, then the economy is going to struggle ultimately. So if we have a consumer with better income, then we're gonna have we're gonna have an economy with better income. So one positive thing would improve another positive thing. So why not? And voter number 3 is that they said that they ran a trichotomy, that our response was this is a response to your trichotomy. Don't penalize us for trying to make a plan to make things better. That's all what we're trying to do. We made this to a policy debate because we don't want to just say that banks are doing bad things for us. We want to actually implement a plan to help out people, because that's what we're all here for. We're here to help people out. And voter number 4 is that they agree with our plan that we should increase the interest rate, but ours makes it better because we're actually going to put money into the consumer's pocket. And with more money in the consumer's pocket, which will go back to one of my first voters, and they're going to have more money to spend, and then we're going to improve the economy. Thus, everyone will be happy. And so I went over my arguments here. We implemented a policy to make everything go well. It's a net benefits, and we're going to have more financial stability, and the U.S. federal government is going to leave the banks accountable. And for these reasons, I believe that the government should win this debate. Thank you.
How do you?
Yeah. I think it's all you, man.
We do it again.
No, we got